Across time, across continents, two languages stand alone, unrelated to any other on Earth. In the shadowed valleys of the Western Pyrenees, the Basques have spoken Euskara for millennia. It is Europe's oldest living language, and it connects to nothing, not Latin, not Celtic, not even Proto-Indo-European. It is a linguistic isolate, sealed off like a time capsule since before Rome was born. Now shift the lens to southern Mesopotamia. c. 3100 BCE. The Sumerians rise in Uruk and Eridu. They build ziggurats, invent cuneiform, and draft the world's first legal codes. And their language? Another isolate. Sumerian belongs to no family. When it vanished around 2000 BCE, it took its roots with it, leaving nothing but clay and mystery. No genetic ties, no cultural exchanges, no known contact zones. But then came the anomaly. Beginning in the late 19th century, and escalating in fringe and academic circles by the 20th, scholars began identifying parallels. Not poetic ones, linguistic ones. Eta and Eta both meaning father. And Ura, water. Buru and Baru, head. Over 150 core vocabulary items showing uncanny overlap. In 1981, linguist Theo Veneman noted that Euskara preserved pre-Indo-European linguistic traits, including ergative grammar and agglutinative structure, just like Sumerian. And yet, mainstream scholars called it typological coincidence. No systematic sound shifts. No proven shared ancestry. And still, the puzzle deepens. Because the Basques, according to the 2021 Pompey Faber University genomic study, have remained genetically isolated since at least the Iron Age around 1000 BCE. That study overturned 70 years of theory, proving the Basques were not Paleolithic relics, but descendants of Neolithic Iberian farmers, who then stopped mixing. Meanwhile, ancient DNA from Mesopotamia reveals the Sumerians were part of West Asian Neolithic gene pools, likely linked to early Iranian and Anatolian migrants, with no European signature. 2 languages, 2 people, 0 migration, 0 admixture. And yet the same whispers keep surfacing. So what explains it? Coincidence? Convergent evolution? Or something buried deeper beyond genes, beyond maps? Because if vocabulary can lie, structure cannot. And the structure of these languages? That's where the next clue lives. That clue is something almost no one outside the field talks about. Something so rare, so structurally unique, that when it appears, linguists take notice. It's called a language isolate. Not just a rare dialect. Not an undocumented language. A true isolate means it has no known relatives, no linguistic siblings, no ancestral tree. There are only a few like this on Earth. Elamite from ancient Iran, Ainu from Japan, Burushaski in Pakistan. And these 2 Basque and Sumerian stand out not just for their age, but for their defiance. Sumerian died around 1800 BCE, its last breath caught in Babylonian scribal schools. Basque, on the other hand, refused to die clinging to the cliffs of northern Iberia while Rome, Visigoths, and Castile swept past. And yet, both remained unconnected to any linguistic family. For centuries, scholars tried to make sense of that. In 1944, Basque linguist René Lafon wrote extensively on Euskara's isolation, how its syntax, vocabulary, and phonetics resisted Indo-European influence even during Roman occupation. Meanwhile, Sumerologists puzzled over Sumerian's grammar, agglutinative, ergative, and structurally alien to the Semitic tongues that follow. Then came a ripple. In the late 19th century, German comparativists began suggesting distant affinities between Sumerian and Basque, not in words, but in how the languages think. Their syntax, their structure, their use of suffixes, case endings, verbal chains. In 2003, Theo Veneman revived the idea, proposing that Euskara might descend from a pre-Indo-European substrate spread across Europe, echoes of a forgotten linguistic continent. But mainstream academia held the line. No shared core vocabulary. No consistent phonological rules. No family. Still, one haunting fact remained. Basque survived. Sumerian did not. Why? What mechanism allowed Euskara to endure when every other pre-Indo-European language of Europe vanished? The answer may lie in its structure. Because Sumerian and Basque don't just share isolation, they share something even rarer. A grammatical skeleton found in only a handful of places on Earth. Ergative, absolutive alignment. And in that structural mirror, another shadow begins to form. That shadow is grammar, but not the kind they teach in school. This isn't about where to place a comma. This is the skeleton of thought, the hidden logic beneath a language. And in both Basque and Sumerian, it's built on a foundation most people have never heard of: ergativity. Here's the shock. Almost every language you've ever heard, English, Latin, Arabic, Sanskrit, follows a nominative accusative structure. That means the subject of a sentence is treated the same, whether it's doing something or just existing. I eat. I sleep. I rule. But Basque doesn't work like that. Neither did Sumerian. They use ergative absolutive alignment, a system so rare it appears in less than 10% of the world's languages. When you say, "he kills the beast," Basque and Sumerian mark the subject of that verb, he, differently than when you say, "he sleeps." They separate actors from experiencers. It's a totally different worldview, one that divides action from existence, one that rewires how sentences are formed and how reality is described. Why does that matter? Because ergativity isn't just a quirk. It's a genetic fingerprint in the evolution of language. It clusters in unlikely places: the Caucasus, the Americas, parts of Australia, and in the oldest languages we've managed to decode. It's found in Elamite, Hattic, Hurrian, and other ghost tongues of the ancient world. Languages from cultures long extinct, many of them linked to the first farmers, to the oldest human migrations. And now, two of the world's most mysterious isolates, Basque and Sumerian, both show this same trait. Deep structural parallels in verb handling, subject-object relationships, and suffix-driven case systems. That's not easy to explain away. Typological chance? Maybe. But this structure, this rare alignment, doesn't spread easily. It survives in isolation, or it gets erased. So why did it survive in Euskara? And why did it first appear in Sumer? If their peoples never met, never traded, never merged, why do they think in the same mathematical pattern? The answer may not lie in grammar alone, because structure is only one layer of identity. The deeper truth, the one scientists didn't expect, might be written in the blood. The blood speaks louder. For over 100 years, the dominant theory about the Basques claimed they were a frozen fragment of Ice Age Europe, a direct line from Paleolithic hunter-gatherers. This narrative, supported by scholars like Cavalli Sforza in the 1982, suggested that their genetic uniqueness and isolated language were remnants of a pre-farming world. But that myth was dismantled in 2015. Matthias Jakobsson's study at Uppsala University, published in PNAS, analyzed ancient genomes from El Portolón Cave in Atapuerca, Spain. What it found was shocking. Modern Basques carry substantial ancestry not from Paleolithic foragers, but from Neolithic farmers who entered Iberia between 5,500 and 3,500 BCE. Then, in 2019, a broader study led by Íñigo Olalde and published in Science pushed the boundary further. This study tracked genetic shifts across 271 ancient Iberian individuals. The result? Basques today are best described not as ancient outliers, but as a typical Iron Age population, frozen in time by long-term genetic isolation starting around 1000 BCE. By 2021, researchers at Pompeu Fabra University confirmed it with genome-wide SNP data from nearly 2,000 modern individuals. Their conclusion was unequivocal. The genetic singularity of the Basques began not in the Paleolithic, but in the Iron Age, reinforced by extreme linguistic and geographic isolation. The key marker? Y-DNA haplogroup R1BDF27. Over 70% of Basque males carry this variant, peaking in Basque provinces like Biscay and Álava. R1BDF27 emerged roughly 4,200 years ago and spread during the Bronze Age. But only in the Basque country did it become a genetic fortress. It didn't evolve there, it was trapped there and amplified by isolation and endogamy. Now, look 4,000 kilometers east into ancient Sumer. Modern descendants of that region, southern Iraq, ancient Uruk, and Eridu, carry a very different Y-DNA profile. Dominant haplogroups J1 and J2, common across West Asia, trace back to early Anatolian and Iranian farmers. Genetic modeling confirms no R1b peak, no DF27 presence, and critically, no shared ancestry with the Basques since the Neolithic split over 9,000 years ago. Autosomal DNA tells the same story. Mesopotamians cluster with Semitic and Iranian lineages. Basques align tightly with Atlantic European profiles. Genetically, they are strangers separated not just by land, but by time and evolution itself. No shared migration, no hybrid population, no genetic bridge. So then, if the blood denies it, and the maps deny it, and the migrations never crossed, why do their languages hum the same tune? Why do their words match? Why does their syntax bend the same way? What force echoes louder than blood? Because now, we leave the genome, and we enter the stone, where symbols emerge not as decoration, but as a memory. But memory, when it breaks the rules of time and distance, is dangerous. For decades, mainstream science has drawn clean borders between Mesopotamia and Iberia. No shared genes, no common ancestors, no trade routes linking the two. But outside that circle, beyond the journals and peer reviews, others dared to redraw the map. Iman Wilkins, the Dutch linguist and iconoclast, suggested in the 1992 that ancient peoples once moved westward from the Near East by sea, not land through forgotten maritime corridors. Not just traders, but entire cultures. He even proposed that the legendary city of Troy, described by Homer, was not in Anatolia, but in Western Europe. An idea that was laughed out of academic rooms, but not forgotten. And then came Igor Garshin, a Russian philologist who in the 2002 argued that the roots of Sumerian language showed substrate influence from an even older Proto-European tongue. He wasn't alone. Other fringe theorists tied these connections to the mysterious Tartessians of southern Iberia, an advanced Bronze Age culture with writing, metallurgy, and a port that faced directly toward North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean. The theory was bold. Around 2200 BCE, as the Akkadian Empire collapsed under the weight of climate disaster and invasion, a westward exodus began. Not of armies, but of outcasts, priests, navigators, survivors. A Neolithic migration cloaked in myth. Some say they passed through Crete, leaving echoes in Linear A. Others claim they made it to southern Iberia, and from there, disappeared into the mountains. Mainstream scholars dismiss it all. No Mesopotamian artifacts in Iberia, no Sumerian script in Europe, no DNA evidence of such a journey. But still, the symbols kept showing up. Spirals, horned figures, triangular grids, carved into the walls of dolmens across Basque territory. Not cuneiform, but not meaningless either. And then, in 2021, deep in a cave in Navarre, archaeologists uncovered something unexpected. It wasn't gold, it wasn't bone, it was a word, pressed into bronze, written in an alphabet no one thought the Basques ever used. The artifact shook the story, because it meant the Basques did write, and they did so far earlier than expected. But what it said changed everything, because it wasn't just a word, it was a memory etched into metal, hidden beneath centuries of soil and silence. And once we looked up from that object, we began seeing signs everywhere. Across the cliffs of Biscay, in the Dolmen de Axitos on the Galician coast, and inside the dark chambers of Atsura Cave, scratched into limestone walls, untouched since the Upper Paleolithic, strange marks stared back. Spirals, comb-like grids, branching tree forms. Some simple, others mathematical. Patterns that repeat in the rock art of Neolithic Iberia and in the temple seals of ancient Sumer. In Lagash and Eridu, Sumerians carved spirals into votive plaques and cylinder seals as early as 2900 BCE. Symbols linked to fertility, water, the cycle of life. And in the Basque heartlands, those same forms twist along the stones of forgotten dolmens, not identical but hauntingly parallel. Linguists warn us pareidolia is a trap, The human brain wants to find meaning. It stitches illusions from dust and shape. A curve becomes a character. A pattern becomes a code. But fringe theorists are louder now. They say these marks aren't a coincidence. They call them prescript signals, what some linguists like Gordon Whitaker have described in other ancient proto-writing systems, like the Vinci symbols or Jiahu signs. They say the Basque spirals aren't art. They're syntax. An ancient script that predates Latin, predates Iberian, maybe even predates phonetic writing itself. And maybe, just maybe, they're part of a memory both peoples inherited. Not genetically, but ritually, visually, passed through ritual, stone, and myth. Because to carve a spiral is to mark time, to name the sun, to record the birth of a cycle. And if two cultures, divided by oceans and millennia, left the same signs in the same stone, what story were they both trying to keep alive? Because one of those stories lives in the myth of a goddess. And she appears in both worlds under different names, in different skies, but always as the one who waits in the mountain. They call her Mari in the Basque valleys, a glowing woman who lives in the cave of Anboto mist, swirling around her like a crown of fog. She controls storms, rides through skies on a chariot of fire, and decides the balance between harvest and ruin. No temples, no idols, just stone, breath, and fear. A goddess without a face, older than memory. Now travel east 3,000 years and 4,000 kilometers to the banks of the Euphrates, to Eridu, the oldest city of Sumer. There, in the cuneiform hymns of 2100 BCE, the Great Mother is named Namu. She dwells in the depths, gives birth to the gods, shapes the first humans from clay. She too has no temple. She is not worshipped. She is remembered. Two goddesses, one in the mountains, one in the deep, both connected to the earth, the water, the weather, both creators but not rulers. Archetypal forces untouched by conquest. In Basque myth, Mari appears seasonally emerging from her cave every 7 years, deciding the fate of crops and kings. In Sumerian myth, Namu births the heavens and retreats, leaving the gods to argue. She does not return, but her memory lingers. Some say this is Yunyan, a collective archetype. The mother is buried deep in the subconscious of humanity. But others aren't so quick to dismiss it. Because the Mari cult has no Indo-European parallels, no Roman echoes, no Christian borrowing. And yet it survives passed through oral tradition in Basque households for centuries, unbroken, as if protected. And in 1962, German mythologist Leo Frobenius proposed that these myths, Mari, Namu, and others like them, may not be mere symbols, but fractured cultural memories. Refractions of an ancient matriarchal religious system that predated writing. A ritual code carried in song, in symbol, and in sound. Because while goddesses can be forgotten, words sometimes survive. And in both myths, both tongues, one word repeats. Simple, small, utterly ancient. A word for the beginning. And that one word spoken in both Euskara and Sumerian set the debate on fire. That word was Aita in Basque. It means father. Spoken with tenderness, passed down through generations like a family stone. But in ancient Sumerian, the same sound Ada also means father. Not borrowed, not distorted. Direct, resonant. It should mean nothing. Languages across the globe share similar-sounding baby words. Papa, Dada, Ama. Linguists call it phonetic convergence, a product of how infants form their first sounds, easy syllables. No surprise. But here's the issue. It's not just Ada and Ada. When you begin tracing the core deep, primal vocabulary shared between these two language isolates, the pattern becomes harder to dismiss. In Euskara, Ura is water. In Sumerian, Or means rain, flow, or flood. Buru in Basque is head, mind, or tip. In Sumerian, Buru again, top, summit, crown. Su in both languages, it burns. Fire in Basque, fire in Sumerian. No transformation, no drift. By 2007, Independent researcher Igor Garshin compiled over 150 such lexical overlaps, terms for natural elements, body parts, family roles, sky, river, and death. Not trade goods, not agriculture. But the oldest layer of language, the words cultures, rarely borrow. Statistically, that's troubling. Because when two unrelated languages, no shared grammar, no shared DNA, no recorded contact still show this volume of overlap, we're past baby talk. Critics fight back. They call it coincidence, or chance sound mimicry. They cite the lack of sound correspondence, rules the patterns that prove true language descent. But then the question flips. If this is all just random, why do these similarities concentrate in core semantic fields? Why don't we see this pattern between Basque and Arabic, or Sumerian and Finnish? Why only between these two orphans? Could it be memory not in the blood, but in the mouth? A cultural residue so deep it survived geography and time? Because maybe language doesn't just evolve. Maybe it remembers. So if they're not related, why do they sound like they remember each other? And if they remember each other, what else survived, untouched, hidden in their silence? Maybe silence is the answer, not absence but protection. In 2020, a linguistic study by Jean-Luc Lenners and José Luis Uriarte pushed forward an emerging theory in cognitive linguistics. Linguistic drift slows dramatically in isolated environments. The fewer outside influences, the less mutation in vocabulary, grammar, and phonology. It's how time freezes, not in stone, but in speech. And the Basques? They are Europe's case study in survival by seclusion. After 218 BCE, the Romans began carving through Iberia. Latin swept across the peninsula except where the mountains rose like walls. The Basques withdrew into the Pyrenees, speaking Euskara across valleys too treacherous for empire. When the Visigoths came, they failed to convert them. When the Moors swept in by 711 CE, they bypassed the Basque highlands entirely. Even Castilian power, dominant by the 15th century, couldn't uproot them. Their language persisted not through dominance, but through retreat. It became a linguistic time capsule, preserving older grammatical traits like ergativity and agglutination long after their neighbors forgot them. That's why Euskara doesn't just sound ancient, it is. But what about the Sumerians? Their empire collapsed by 2000 BCE, but their language didn't disappear overnight. It lingered first as a religious script, then as a scholarly tongue taught to Babylonian scribes for nearly a millennium after Sumer's fall. Then something stranger happened. Elements of Sumerian began appearing in other languages, substrate echoes. Hurrian, Hattic, Elamite. Languages spoken in the borderlands of Mesopotamia, none Indo-European, none Semitic. In 2012, scholar Gonzalo Rubio highlighted structural bleed between late Sumerian and early Elamite, shared suffix chains, case patterns, even calendar terms. So if Basque held its memory by isolation, did Sumerian preserve pieces of itself by diffusion? If one fossilized and the other scattered, how do we trace the original? Because there's still one deeper mystery, one we've dodged again and again. It's the question that flips the lens. The one no one dares ask out loud. Not, are they connected? But who came first? What if? The answer is neither. What if both were children of something older, something lost? Beneath the ruins of language and the broken map of genetics, there is another trail. One carved not by cities or armies, but by seeds, stones, and silence. The Neolithic began around 10,000 years ago. From the highlands of Anatolia, early farmers moved slowly, deliberately westward into Europe and eastward into Mesopotamia, carrying grain, cattle, and culture. It wasn't empire. It was survival, community, myth, ritual. And according to genetic models published in Nature, 2018, Hawk et al., these early agriculturalists left a deeper legacy than we ever imagined. Both modern Basques and ancient Sumerians show heavy ancestry from these pre-Indo-European, West Asian Neolithic populations. Two directions, two destinies, one source. They planted the first wheat in Iberia around 5,500 BCE, long before Rome. Long before the Celts, the same group had already reached the fertile floodplains of Sumer by 6,000 BCE, settling Eridu, building shrines to gods whose names we still cannot translate. This wasn't a migration. It was a pulse, a ripple of human movement across continents. And it wasn't just tools and crops they carried. Across the Mediterranean and the Near East, we find megalithic graves, dolmens, burial chambers marked with spirals, solar discs, concentric circles. From the Basque country to the Levant, some with identical alignment to solstices. These were not random graves. These were temples of memory. Mythology echoes too. A sky mother, a cave, fire from the earth, rain from a mountain god. The elements recur, from the Mari cult in the Pyrenees to the hymns of Enki in Sumer. Not identical myths, but parallel motifs that hint at shared roots, not borrowed stories. And then there's what geneticists now call ghost populations, ancestral groups whose DNA still exists in us, but who left no name, no record, no face. They show up in modeling like shadows, not visible, but undeniable. Could one of them, just one, have been the seed behind both Basque and Sumerian? Could this lost tribe have shaped two languages that outlived all others? Because if that's true, if one vanished culture gave rise to both, then the next question writes itself. If there was one lost person behind them both, where did they go? Maybe they didn't go anywhere. Maybe they were broken, not erased, but fractured, scattered across the map like dust in the folds of history. Because what if Basques and Sumerians aren't linked by blood or script or grammar? What if they're linked by absence, by the echo of something taken, something that tried to vanish, but couldn't? Not entirely. Sumer fell first. By 2000 BCE, their cities burned, their kings overthrown, their language pushed out by Akkadian, then Babylonian, then silence. Yet their signs stayed in the clay, their gods folded into others, their tongue dead, yet preserved in scribal schools for 1,000 years, an ancient language studied by people who no longer understood it. And the Basques? They were never conquered but always cornered, retreating into the Pyrenees again and again through wave after wave of invasion. Roman legions, Visigoth warlords, Islamic caliphates, Castilian kings, each one trying to rewrite their story. But Euskara refused. It whispered in kitchens, cried out in shepherd songs, carved itself into secret alphabets. When the rest of Iberia forgot who they were, the Basques remembered in their language, their legends, their land. No other two peoples on earth have survived like this. Isolated, orphaned, misunderstood, but still speaking, still singing, still remembering. Maybe the real link isn't genetic. Maybe it's human. A shared memory of rupture, of being the last voice when the rest of the world moved on. Of surviving not because you were the strongest, but because you refused to forget. So maybe the Basques and the Sumerians were never brothers in origin. Maybe they were cousins in survival. And maybe that's the older story, the one beneath lineage, beneath language, a story of memory. Because maybe the real connection isn't in the blood or word, but in the echo that refuses to die. And somewhere beneath the ash of forgotten cities, another echo waits.